but, they only let people all the time. So they don't have to make a video. And it's not. Yeah.
There might be a lot what a lot. I know.
Yeah. I get it.
There might be.
Give me the.
Yeah. I have a good.
Hi. Hello, Jingle, thank you. Thank you.
I know, right? We'll explain it all.
Oh, right. I know when I was walking in and it was so bright.
Yes.
¿Cómo está? Buenas tardes.
Yeah.
Dije, yo conozco esa cara.
Pretty good. Great. So 5:05, we're opening up the special study session. Buenas tardes, good evening, everybody. Is it? Next time. I get a little closer. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Gabe.
We haven't, do we need to do roll call for this?
No, it's a study session.
Pretty
so,
quick. Okay.
yeah, so,
No pledge
We
allegiance.
don't have
we'll do that in the following one.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's move forward then. Go ahead, Gabe, you want to do the presentation?
Okay. All right, I have a presentation. I'm gonna go up to the lectern. And this item's for the sidewalk vendor proposed ordinance. I'm gonna speak kind of slow because the way that the translator is gonna work on this, based on past meetings, it's a little bit different. So I'm gonna speak slow, pause after that, allow them to be able to do the translation in Spanish after.
Okay,
I speak,
perfect,
okay?
all right, perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners. This item is the regarding a study session on sidewalk vendor regulations. Do we have our translator online? Okay. Yes, we're gonna need you translating during the meeting after pauses during the presentation. You tell me you need to translate Spanish. Okay, you would need to translate on the English channel for the present. Yes, because we have a, yes, thank you. Okay. All right. So some background on this, the state legislator got involved in regarding regulations for sidewalk vendors in 2018. That law is Senate Bill 946, which, go ahead. Which allows cities to regulate sidewalk vendors with respect to time, place, and manner. As long as it's related to objective health, safety, and welfare concerns. So typically in the past before this law, the city would allow vendors either merchandise or food. It would require you to be able to construct a building or rent a facility in the city on private property to be able to sell food or merchandise. So the state legislature, the law that they passed limits what we can do with respect to sidewalk vendors in the public domain. Okay. There was also another bill that was passed, which was Senate Bill 972. Let me go, sorry. And it revised certain equipment requirements needed for sidewalk vendors selling food. It also expanded the type of food preparation that would be allowed for sidewalk vendors. And it was intended to streamline the permitting process for these vendors. It also criminalizes violations of the California Retail Food Code. And so there's quite several requirements from this, and no longer under the state law would it require health permit from the local health enforcement agency. Would no longer require you to obtain a health permit from the local health enforcement agency. It also created something called the Compact Mobile Food Operation. And that's a facility that operates from an individual or from a push cart stand or display or a pedal driven cart. Okay, so there's two types of sidewalk vendors under the law. One is a sidewalk vendor that is stationary, meaning a person who sells food or merchandise from a push cart stand, display, wagon, and so forth. Or a roaming sidewalk vendor, meaning that sidewalk vendor moves from place to place without stopping. Except to complete a transaction. So we did some research on what we do allow. So in residential zones, there are some type of commercial operations that are permitted if you get a home occupation permit from the city. But it's a little bit more strict if you are selling food. So one permit that we have is a cottage food operations. So there's certain regulations, certain types of food that you can prepare, but it does require you to be 600 feet from another cottage food operator. But you do need to get a permit from the city and from the county. The other is what's called a micro enterprise home kitchen operation. The legislature passed a bill, AB 626, that allowed these operations. So essentially, you could prepare meals out of a home and serve them as long as it's limited to 30 meals per day and 60 meals per week. Currently, when we research this with the county, there are only 2 that are these micro enterprise home kitchens. So these home kitchens, we have to allow under our regulations, subject to the state requirements. Oh, sorry about that. I thought I fixed that. Ice cream truck operators, we do have regulations for them in the city. This was passed in 2011, and it does require ice cream truck operators to be at least 300 feet from a school or church during operating hours, and also 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after. Ice cream truck vendors also cannot operate out of parking lots in a park, playground, or recreational facility. And there are hours of operations that we enforce. So this is the only type of operator that we do allow to operate in public areas, like on streets in the city currently. So as the planning commission, what can the planning commission regulate? It can regulate these 3 things. It cannot regulate. It cannot prohibit sidewalk vending, so we have to allow it. We cannot impose a requirement based on economic competition. or require that the vendor get approval from another entity that's not the city. The city can regulate the following list of items. One includes hours of operation. The second includes sanitation requirements. Compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as requiring them to get a sidewalk vending permit from the city and a business license. We can require a California Department of Tax and Fee Administration seller's permit. Any licenses from the state or from local agencies like the county health department. And we could require them to provide information on their operations. So what I did provide in the staff report is what the other cities do around the valley and to determine who has an ordinance on the books. The cities that do have an ordinance include Cathedral City, Desert Hot Springs, Indio, and Palm Springs. So they all have their different standards and they're all listed in that table. And we have that table available for anyone on the table over there if you'd like to review what those standards are. So the city did host a community forum at the Coachella Library on September 26th. And there were a mix of advocates for street vendors as well as representatives from local restaurants. Okay. So now I'll go into the ordinance. And one thing I want to be clear about is I think there's a perception that what we're seeing actually occurring in the city qualifies as a street vendor under state law. So remember that a street vendor under state law would be allowed to operate in areas that would be considered public, like a sidewalk on the side of a street. Or a public park. Okay, so in 2020, when the city was drafting an ordinance, originally it had a cap on the number of vendors that could sell in the city at 50. We're no longer recommending this cap because we don't even think that we can do this under the existing state law. So this is what the ordinance would require. And in red are some changes that have been recommended since the 2020 draft ordinance. what you would need to get is a business license and a sidewalk vending permit from the city. A California seller's permit with sales tax number issued by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. A driver's license or passport or tax ID number. Whatever would be the minimal requirement from the county, either health department permit or food handler's permit. And the site plan showing that the sidewalk vendor would maintain a 36-inch clear distance. Originally, the ordinance would have required an insurance policy, but instead, it's recommended that they provide some kind of indemnification of the city. Originally, background check was being recommended, but we're recommending to remove that because we think it will deter people from getting that permit. So for a stationary vendor, they would be allowed in non-residential and mixed-use zones in the city, and they would have to maintain a 36-inch clear distance along a sidewalk. And away from building entrances. And so the previous ordinance didn't specify a distance, and we thought it needs to be more specific. So we suggested 15. And talking to the building official, it was recommended that 25 be the distance from an entrance because of having to leave a building and a place for refuge during emergencies. Um, 30 feet from a street or highway intersection. And then not within, the previous ordinance said not within the vicinity of farmer's market, swap meet, or temporary event permit. But because it wasn't specific, we thought that would be difficult to enforce. So we want to put a distance of at least 150 feet. And if you wanted to be a sidewalk vendor, you would have to be within 500 feet of a parking lot. So the other requirements that staff is recommending, which is similar to the ice cream truck ordinance, so to be consistent, is that there would be a 300-foot distance from a school when it's in session, and also 30 minutes before it's in session and 30 minutes after. We noticed that other cities have a distance from a freeway on-ramp and off-ramp, and originally we were looking at 30 feet, but in talking to the city engineer, for safety concerns, they would recommend 200 feet. So the 30-foot distance that's in the ordinance is reflected here from the street intersection. So this is what the corner cutoff area in the ordinance would look like. But the city engineer is actually recommending that distance be 40 feet because the radius of those intersections are actually 40 feet. And so the sidewalk vendor would have to operate outside that triangle area. And here's an example. Here's an example what that would look like. The sidewalk vendor would have to maintain a 36-inch clear distance or 3 feet for ADA purposes. So most sidewalks are about 6 feet. The widest sidewalks we have are on 6th Street. As far as parks, there are some regulations and sidewalk vendors could operate in them, but they would be prohibited under the ordinance with those parks where we have a concessions agreement with any kind of entity, right? So for example, like the soccer leagues, then sidewalk vendors wouldn't be permitted to operate in those parks. Those parks would be Bagduma Park, Rancho Las Flores, and the reason why it's Veterans Park, we do have an agreement with the firehouse, which is located on the same parcel as Veterans Park. The parks with no agreement would be Avenue 53 Tot Lot, Sierra Vista, Dateland, and the Oro Park. Maybe the big thing to know is where it would not be permitted is Bagduma Park, Rancho Las Flores, and Veterans Park. So we created a map based on direction from City Council of where we thought sidewalk vendors would be able to operate. And so we have this draft map that I'll explain. So in yellow reflects all the areas where only roaming sidewalk vendors would be able to operate. The areas in purple are non-residential districts, and there are areas that are developed, right? So a sidewalk vendor needs to operate in an area that has a sidewalk and is in close proximity to existing parking. So most stationary vendors would be able to operate there, and a lot of that would be concentrated on Grapefruit Boulevard and Cesar Chavez Street. And the parks that are permitted to operate are highlighted here as well. So some of the other requirements would include restrictions on time, sanitary conditions. The sidewalk vendor for a stationary facility would not be able to have tables, chairs, or shade structures. You wouldn't be able to discharge liquid into the streets or onto any property. For roaming sidewalk vendors, here are the operating times, so it'd be limited between 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. But roaming vendors would be able to operate between 6 a.m. to 1:30 a.m. There would be penalties for violating some of the regulations under the ordinance. These are the penalties that would range from $100 from a first violation, $200 for a second violation, and each additional violation would be $500. What we are recommending to add is that we are allowing 2 warnings before the first fine is issued. What do other cities regulate that we noticed from they regulate proximity to schools, proximity to doorways for businesses, proximity to off ramps, and then lastly, proximity to another vendor. So here are some photos just to highlight what we see going on. So these 2 photos, I think a lot of people have the impression that these would qualify as sidewalk vendors, but they do not, and I'll explain. So these 2 are operating on private property and not in the public areas along streets, along a sidewalk. They have tables, chairs, and a shade structure, which under our draft ordinance would not be permitted. So if the ordinance was adopted, what you see in these pictures would not be permitted in the city if it was taking place on private property. So here's another scenario. This is actually in the county, but this is on an unimproved lot. There's no sidewalk. It's actually on the private property. There are shade structures, tables, and chairs. For all those reasons, it would not be permitted at a location like that. Here's another scenario. This is a photo taken from Los Angeles. And this would technically be a sidewalk vendor. They're located a good distance from the street intersection. But where they would not be compliant is they have shade structures, tables, and they have chairs. Here's another scenario off of Avenue 52. In this scenario, the vendor selling fruit. With this scenario, because they are operating in the public right of way, right, which is where a sidewalk vendor could operate. But I mentioned earlier that stationary sidewalk vendors are only permitted in commercial districts. This is a residential district. So only roaming vendors would be permitted in neighborhoods. So other than that, I just wanted to highlight one of the things back in 2020 that the city council wanted staff to do was look at a more holistic effort for this ordinance. So there are things the city wants to do to help sidewalk vendors that want to grow their business and transition into brick and mortar facilities, and we're working on that right now. And we are applying for grants to be able to build those facilities and and develop those training programs. So if there are questions about it, we do have our economic development director here that can explain that if there are questions. So for the planning commission, the city council wanted the planning commission to consider this ordinance and provide suggestions, discuss this. You will be making a recommendation in the future based on feedback today. But we want to be able to hear your feedback and then also allow the public to be able to provide testimony if they would like.
Chair, I have a recommendation because we do have a public hearing item on the regular planning commission agenda. So if you guys can limit your discussion until 6 p.m. And then if there's anybody from the public that wants to discuss the sidewalk vending, we can do that at the regular PC meeting during the public comment section.
Okay, so we just go ahead and we got 20 minutes.
Yeah, just so the public understands, you'll have an opportunity to speak, but that'll be at the meeting that starts at 6 under the public comment section of that one. Since it's a non-agenda discussion and the sidewalk vending is not on that agenda. So if you bear with us, it's just because we have public hearing items on that agenda that we need to get to. So if you could please limit your discussion until 6 p.m. and then we could start the other meeting and give the public an opportunity to speak then.
Okay, it's 5:41. We're gonna open up the public hearing. A couple of questions, Gabe. Do we have a copy of SB, the ordinance, state ordinance?
We do, yeah. So we provided those 2 Senate bills in the staff reports.
Okay, because obviously the state is gonna supersede the city municipality, so I like to get a draft of it to see where we're at. One of the questions too on the license and passports, are we recommending that they present a passport?
Some level of identification. And so we realized there might be concern if someone was undocumented that they wouldn't be able to provide certain documentation. But there's the possibility you can get a driver's license without having being undocumented and then also having a passport.
Okay, because I just wanted to make it clear that we're a sanctuary city. We got to make sure that you know we have total access to somebody that doesn't have a passport. Just
I would leave that up to the chair.
yeah, I think it'd be good to interpret with some clarity on it.
So I would just recommend that we'll have the member to pause and keep some of your comments short.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Director, I have some comments. First and foremost, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I know this is a hot topic. Yes, and for I want to highlight section 12.50.030, the permits required. we struck through the language of general liability. Can you please, Mr. Director, share with me your thought process and why that language was struck?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. This was recommended based on some complaints we received on the costs related to getting a permit, right? So if you need to get insurance, that was presented as an impediment.
I think
I would advise that the language be reinstated and that we ask for general liability only makes sense and is fair that the rest of our businesses are actually brick and mortar businesses that are in business actually are required to have general liability. So I would caution the policymaker here to strike the language. So in full transparency and full fairness, with what's going on between both entities, whether it be vendors outside of brick and mortar or brick and mortar restaurants, that we do have general liability. Second comment is section 12.50.100, the penalties. Starting with A, after 2 warnings, I want to know the thought process behind the 2 warnings.
The concern was being very punitive right away. The thought is to provide a lot more education initially for anyone that might be a violator. And then, okay.
I would agree, but in all fairness to, again, our brick and mortar restaurants, I would like to see that warning reduced to 1. And that would go, that would be the same for B, item B as well, under the same subsection. And lastly, my last comment is a pathway to brick and mortar. I want to congratulate all our stakeholders in our community and those who choose to invest in our community, i.e. restaurants and stakeholders who've decided to invest in our community in restaurants, right? I know it's a labor and it's a big effort. And I would like to see a program where we promote street vendors either to brick and mortar and or lunch or trucks, right? Or food trucks. But ultimately, I'd like to see a pathway to brick and mortar rather sooner than later. So I would suggest that we limit the renewal of licenses to street vendors, right? There'd be a cap, but there also institute a plan for them to be on that path to brick and mortar. So ultimately, the end goal here is to occupy vacant facilities throughout the city. So go ahead. And now, I don't know what that pathway looks like, right? And I don't know how long it's gonna take for a street vendor to ultimately reach that goal of brick and mortar, but I believe we do have some testimony businesses who once started as a cottage kitchen and ended up in a brick and mortar, right? And so it's a very realistic goal to achieve, right? Because the data's there. Now, ultimately, the city and this program is gonna have to do some work, right, and monitor. And perhaps they could work with local universities, such as with Commissioner Fonseca has. He's got a bunch of college graduates that are professionals looking for jobs, and perhaps they can work on business programs, right? Or some sort of outlines that help these students and help these small businesses here get on board here. Thank you so much for my comments.
No, I think it makes sense, but I think if you look at it realistically, some of the street vendors are a little more challenged. Obviously, everybody has a humble beginning. They start selling in the streets, eventually, get a restaurant, but I think we, like Gabe was saying that, and our Economic Development Director, Selena, that, we're looking at possible funding, and I think we should offer that hand to see how many we could actually, we can assist to actually get an establishment where they could create their own little restaurant. And, everybody has a humble beginning, and we have to respect that and try to assist everybody we can to get to that goal.
I have a comment regarding the recommendations for the time frame for the vendors. What was the time frame again? You said from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning?
So
I'd like to get a clarification on that, and I'd like to know why that time frame until 1 a.m.
So the question is,
Yeah, so 1:30
To 1
is
a.m.?
for the non-residential areas for stationary and roaming sidewalk vendors. I'm not sure what the rationale, right? I'm assuming it's later for non-residential areas and then earlier for neighborhoods. But that timeframe could change if we needed it to.
I'd like to have considerations on that, let's reevaluate the timeframes for that.
Too
Yeah.
earlier?
Yeah,
we're gonna,
we'll have a discussion.
yeah, we'll have a
This is
discussion so we
comment.
can figure all that out and then present it to the city council.
Another consideration is regarding the pathway for mobile vendors and for sidewalk vendors to go into brick and mortar. We do have the Resilience Center, so I like to explore the thoughts on, helping those vendors. They can use that facility, that space to provide their services.
I think one where we could start with Bagduma Park. I think we have a certified kitchen at Bagduma Park, don't we, Selena? So I think we should make that accessible to the vendors where, if they need to cook something to sell it out in the streets, we should give
I
the
don't think
public.
that's allowed, right?
I don't think there's plans that Selena could probably talk to, that we're applying for funding to make that happen.
Yeah, we'll put a structure together in a calendar, and then we could, give the public access to the kitchen. So, you need a certified kitchen, they can go out and sell food in the public.
Well, there's already a kitchen there at center there, right? Correct?
Yeah, actually, there is a commercial kitchen at Bagduma Community Center, and so we have proposed that in our TCC or Transformative Climate Communities proposal to actually make that a demonstration commercial kitchen. We will hear about that decision on December 1st. So that is forthcoming. We're very looking forward to that. And as Director Perez mentioned, we do have in that same application, a business incubation program in TCC on Sixth Street. So we will have about 6 storefronts that one will serve as a business incubator, and the rest will be, storefronts available to people who wish to become brick and mortar, business persons there. And also the CRC, or the Community Resilience Center, the former Hidden Harvest building, that will completely have a food lab type emphasis. So we're really looking forward to hearing about that. We won't know until April of 2024. So in the meantime, we will continue working with you all on those efforts. And I also want to add that we also have a displacement avoidance plan that has been, it's in draft form right now. But if we do again get funded on December 1st, we will actually put that into action, and we will take all of this feedback that we're getting here today, so that we have, policies that the council and the planning commission can consider. And so we don't displace anyone, including street vendors or our restaurant owners or any other business, including low income families.
Thank you, Selena.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important that the city empowers all our, especially street vendors. Everybody has a humble beginning. Everybody that has a successful business, started, selling food. And we just need to make it accessible to the whole community across the board.
Right, and I agree, but we also really need to make it fair for our business owners who are already here and who are investing their dollars currently, and who are actually, those are community stakeholders, right? It's like the majority of the people that I see coming as food vendors are from out of town, and they don't make their living here in Coachella. They don't reside here, and I've seen very minimal Coachella residents being street vendors, right? And so I think that if you want to come and do business from out of town in Coachella, I believe that you should have to obtain the proper business requirements and licenses and or general liabilities as any other vendor in our city.
Okay, so I think that we should, we could narrow the ordinance. It has to be a Coachella residence.
I'm not sure if we can do that.
Can we do that, or?
We can't, no.
We can add, I believe, a provision that indicates
Condition
something
of-
about roaming vendors, right? Or outside vendors.
So, yeah, so limiting to just residents, it's not possible. I think there'll be a lot of constitutional issues if you decide to go that route. And you would open up the city for legal liability. So that is
Perfect.
not
Let's do
recommended.
it.
However, we can have permits for those that are outside vendors, like, right? Other cities have done that.
Yeah, I would have to look at that. Like, are you talking about different
So
requirements
for
for?
example, they're not Coachella City,
Mhm.
residents, or, already have a firm business. They would, if they're from, let's say, Los Angeles, because we have a lot of people coming from
Yeah.
Los Angeles, that they would all be required to have a particular permit and follow the same rules.
I would have to look at that and get back to you. I don't know. I don't know any city that has different requirements
I
for
think it's
different
People.
residents and non-residents.
So if they're taxpayers in the city of Coachella, would it make sense they would have access to whatever perks the city is providing?
Can we do something like that? Like, yeah, so for instance, if you are a resident of Coachella and you apply for a license, is there a way to incentivize those people first, right?
I think so, right?
Like I said, I would have to look at that. I don't think that any city has given preferential treatment to residents. And like I said, that would definitely open up some constitutional questions that I would have to look at and get back.
Could we get some legal opinions? Council?
Yes, you
Okay.
definitely can.
Thank you so much.
I have a
Okay.
comment regarding the permits and residents and non-residents. I do see that Palm Springs has a different fee for permits when it comes to residents to non-residents. And on our section, it says it's non-proposed.
That's constitutional.
So is that something we can propose as well, that if a resident will have a permit like any permit, it will have a different fee regarding to someone coming from Los Angeles, will have a different fee?
Yeah, so I could definitely take a look at that. I'll take a look at the Palm Springs one and see, Palm Springs is also one of our clients, so I'll talk to
Okay.
their city attorney and make sure that they haven't been challenged or.
Yeah, let's get an
So-
opinion on it from legal counsel and then.
Mr. Director, what's the logic behind our fee schedule? Just obtain?
Just to at least get, I mean, most of this is pretty low cost already.
Yeah.
To be able to get the permit. I know one of the letters we received from, one of the groups that provided the staff report wants it to be like $25, but I do feel like it's already low, it's recommended. I mean, the other cities, we haven't determined what our fee would be, right? So we still would need to do that by resolution. So the planning commission, you can recommend a fee for us to look at. But this outlines on this sheet what other cities are doing right now.
I think, Director, we'll have, further conversation about all these different items and, we could, we'll figure all that out.
Okay, and just one thing I do want to share, and I know we're gonna have to go to the other meeting and then we'll have the public comment if people want to comment them.
Okay.
There is an interest, and we've talked to both those supporting or advocates for the sidewalk vendors. And then those that are advocating on behalf of restaurants. And the people that we've been talking to advocating for restaurants isn't just for restaurants, right? They have a concern also for the sidewalk vendors, and it's more about this issue of being fair. So one of the things that they're interested in having is the ordinance adopted sooner than later, because we cannot regulate anything right now. Until we have an ordinance, we can't regulate it. Some of the concerns that have been expressed to us that you've seen in the photos, most of those sidewalk vendors will not exist in those locations. It will have to locate in those areas that we designate, right?
Mhm.
And so, the sooner that we adopt an ordinance, the sooner actually we can enforce something.
I think what's important to understand is that, we're dealing with state law. And obviously, state law supersedes, the county and municipalities. So we have to understand that whatever we do it in the guideline of whatever the SB, whatever that is, it's passed by the state. So that, we need to make that very clear.
I believe we are. So one of the things that I would like to see, especially for outside vendors, specifically for outside vendors, right? Those people who come from afar to do business in Coachella. I'd like to see a permit maybe around like, $2,500 annually for someone like them.
Okay. All right, we're gonna finish up this public hearing. Son las 6, vamos a comenzar otra junta. If anybody has any comments, we could, you can talk during the, you gotta wait till we go to the public. When we're public comment, we'll open up, and anybody has anything to say or wanna mention something, we'll open up. You'll have 3 minutes to address the commission. Okay?
Do you want to close the?
No, so it's not a public hearing, so if you could just adjourn the meeting and then
Okay.
reconvene the regular planning commission.
We're gonna terminate this,
Close the meeting.
close the meeting, and we're gonna go on with the public commission, planning commission meeting. It's 6:02, meeting called to order. And we do the pledge allegiance, Director.